So I would like to introduce you guys to our very next speaker. His name is Tobias. Tobias is the CTO at Atono, and he's been creating software since the last century in various roles, spanning design, development, operations, and management. He is passionate about creating environments where everyone can contribute to innovation and work together to build the best products. Just a heads up, after Tobias, we'll do a little break, but Mike and myself will come out. We'll give you guys some instructions, and then we'll just jump on a break. So please help me welcome Tobias to the stage.
Thank you. All right, hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. Yeah? Okay. So thank you for coming to my talk. As you see there, if you want to ask questions, just scan that QR code. What we're going to be talking about today is velocity and the velocity you might experience working for a startup and how you can maybe preserve some portion of that velocity as you scale up into an enterprise. So before I go on with that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Tobias. Been working in the software industry for over 25 years. Last century, wow, that sounded bad, but true. So I started out as a software developer. I expanded my scope to include testing. I spent a lot of time working on operations. I also did product and product strategy. I've done that at a number of scales as well. So I've done that as a successful startup. That was a lot of work, but it was also very rewarding. I enjoyed it a lot. I've worked at not just one, but multiple failed startups, equal amount of work, much less rewarding. I've worked at companies under 1,000 folks and over 1,000 folks in the enterprise. And I've also worked at a large public company, which was subsequently taken private. So I'll leave it to you to see if there's a connection between that and my slide theme. Okay, but my natural habitat is at startups. That's where I really enjoy working. And the reason that I enjoy it is because I love the short amount of time between when someone has a great idea and that idea gets into customers' hands. So that's rewarding in and of itself. I'm just going to get out of the slides here. That's rewarding in and of itself, but what I really like about that is the fast feedback you get from customers, so you can continue improving your product with rapid customer feedback. That feels really great. So I like to call that velocity, but let's get a little more specific about what velocity is. So in dogmatic agile, velocity is defined as the number of story points that you deliver per iteration. If you're using Scrum, iteration would be a sprint. If you're using something like Kanban, you can pick a sample size and calculate velocity that way. But ultimately, it comes down to counting story points, so we need to define those as well. Story points are estimates assigned by the team before doing a story. They can be numerical, such as a Fibonacci number or exponential number. They can be further abstracted into shirt sizes, which are later assigned numbers to calculate velocity. But the important thing here is that they are team-specific because the team assigns them, so you really can't compare one team's velocity to another. And they're also relative. They really only talk about whether one story is larger or more complex than another story. So this all sounds like a lot of funny money. How do we actually do anything with these abstract concepts? If we want to get down to brass tacks, what really matters to startups in particular to survive is revenue. But unfortunately, we can't just take revenue and ascribe it to individual stories. Doing that will drive very short-term strategy because it hides stories that have strategic value that might be building to something larger in the future. It also hides stories that improve things like user experience, which may not contribute directly to your revenue in the short term, but certainly prevent churn, customer churn. So that's equally important to a startup. So probably the best we can do is that if we feel that our product owners are doing their job and they are able to talk with real customers, understand the customer pain, be able to articulate those in user stories that the development teams can understand, and those development teams can assign story points that are correct on average. They don't have to be correct for every user story, just correct on average. Then we can reasonably say that this is a measure of delivering customer value, and we can at least say if a team is increasing their velocity, keeping their velocity stable, or decreasing their velocity. And that's what we care about. So suppose you are part of a startup and you found a niche and customers are actually willing to pay you some money for the software that you're delivering to them. So you are provided with some new choices in your life. You might have a very niche product and you want to expand the scope of that product to a broader market, get more customers that way. You might be more successful than you expected to be and need to quickly do some shoring up in order to scale. You might have something that's more like a prototype of a product and now go and cross your T's and dot your I's, perhaps work on security, operations. Depending on the type of product that you have, you might actually need to hire humans to do customer support. But in any of these cases, it's unlikely that you can keep the original startup team that you had and just keep adding people into it. You have to form more than one team. So how do you do that? And that's a big question, and also a question that's hard to or a decision that's hard to reverse later on. So the typical thing to do is divide and conquer by specialty. So you hire 3 security engineers, you have a security team. If you want to follow more like a 90s model, you could do layers. So you have a UI layer, a middleware layer, a services layer, backend layer, that type of thing, all fronted by a customer support group to insulate the development teams from customer requests. If you have a product that's amenable to this type of division, you might divide by product area. Everyone gets a slice of the product to support and develop. Or my personal favorite, if you have a microservice architecture, then you define a strong ownership amongst teams and those microservices. And all of these different ways of organizing your company, these can be used in combination as well. They have different characteristics. Some of them are great for stability. Some of them have different scaling factors. But what we're concerned about today is which one of these is best for velocity. So starting on one end of the spectrum, we have departmentalization. This is the default choice for many companies. It has a lot of historical precedent. It makes a lot of sense in the physical world where you have physical resources or physical tools, and you need to co-locate people around those so that you can share them. You can think of, assembly lines or things like that. Makes a lot of sense. Because it's been around for so long, it's familiar to us, it's really easy to conceptualize. Even if we're in a digital world, we're very used to this type of organization. You may be forced into this in particular ways. For example, at a public company, it's very common for a security organization to be required to have an arm's length relationship with product teams to avoid conflict of interest. So you might not have the option to not do this in some cases. But it does have various effects on velocity. The number one being the typical way for these types of departments to interact with a product organization is through reviews. So making sure that every story that goes out conforms to particular characteristics or security constraints, so on. This would work just fine if those departments had infinite resources and could provide those reviews on demand, but unfortunately this is the real world. Those departments are resource constrained, and their workload varies like everyone else's, so you might get stuck behind a large queue when you're trying to release a feature. Trying to coordinate schedules between these organizations is extremely difficult, and like I say, variable load on the various departments will just ultimately reduce in a gridlock. It also has some secondary negative effects on overall velocity. It's very typical for these types of organizations to define their requirements through policies. But because the practitioners within those departments don't work on delivering software day in, day out, these policies could be quite broad. Like, for example, if you had a QA organization that had automated code coverage standard, that might be great for the majority of the organization, but might be very difficult to implement for specific teams that would need exceptions. I'm thinking of something like a mobile team or something like that. And finally, the human factor of empire building. All of these departments are going to be fighting for the same finite resources, and they have good intentions on doing that. They want to fulfill their mandate as fully as possible, but that might not result in the overall optimal result for velocity for the entire organization. So what's the alternative? Cross-functional teams. So if we say that velocity is roughly correlated to revenue, then what we want to do is remove any and all obstacles to what it takes to get a story from conception to into the customer's hands. And we can do that by forming teams that have all of the specialties required to make that happen. What specialties are actually required will depend on the team's purview itself. It depends on the type of product that you're trying to get to market. I'm thinking of things like product owners. We're talking about developers, designers, QA, operations engineers, so on and so forth. But this is not an easy thing to do. It's probably easier for a startup. When you're in a startup, you're sort of in a cross-functional team to start out. But if you're starting from a departmental model, this can be quite difficult. It does place a lot of demands, first and foremost, on the team members. So it might not be possible to staff all of the specialties required. And so, for example, a developer might have to stretch and do some testing that he wasn't necessarily expecting to do. A designer might have to jump into some sort of product ownership position from time to time. So it does require a certain personality and willingness to stretch amongst the team members. If you do have a microservice architecture or some other division of your architecture based on team ownership, there's no guarantee, despite the best intentions of product owners to route stories as best they can, that a given story will stay within those boundaries. So stories can span microservices or tiers. So it may be necessary for the team to work on areas that they're not as familiar with. And on the management side, this also requires a leap of faith. So, managers have to be comfortable that cross-cutting concerns like security or architecture or conformance to a style guide on the UX side is getting done by individual teams without oversight. It is the oversight that erodes the velocity, and this level of trust can be built up over time. Okay, there are also some less tangible advantages. So again, sort of on the human side of things, typically these teams are fairly small, let's say 6 people plus or minus 2. With a team that small and you're working with folks day in, day out, it's much easier to develop trust in that sort of model. With everyone, especially with everyone having a common goal of shipping stories. Everyone, all of the specialties within a team have to represent their particular disciplines, but it's much easier to come to a reasonable balance between all of those considerations with a group of 6 people than it is across departments. Maybe just another way of putting this is that there are no fences to throw over. The team has to win or lose together. And also stories that get stuck are extremely visible. So if something's not moving along, it's sitting there on your team Kanban board. Somebody's got to pick it up and move it to the next workflow step. In terms of the human factor, again, Teams that are formed like this tend to have much higher sense of ownership of the product that they're delivering or their portion of the product that they're delivering, and as such have more job satisfaction, which has the effect of reducing employee churn overall, which can have very negative effects on velocity when you consider all of the knowledge that walks out the door when someone leaves and all of the time it takes to ramp a new person up into that role. So that's actually sort of at the end of my list here, but that is extremely important. Okay, so that is cross-functional teams. What is sort of the state of the nation of cross-functionality? I think the most common thing right now is when we adopted Agile back in perhaps the 2000s or even a little earlier, it became very common for test engineers to be embedded on development teams. I think that's more or less the standard in the industry at the moment. More recently, a similar transformation with the DevOps movement, making teams responsible for the operational considerations of their software, and in some cases, embedding operations engineers within teams. But where are the opportunities that we have to extend this model? First off, I think that embedding UX folks and designers within development teams is a very natural extension of this model and extremely important as the demand for easier to use software or more approachable software is increasing all the time. With Dogmatic's Agile, again, it is actually mandated that product owners be directly embedded in product teams, but I actually don't see that in the industry. Typically, product is a separate department. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to represent the customer's needs more directly on a day-to-day basis. And finally, another thing we don't see very often is product communicators and support folks being directly embedded in teams. Typically, teams are escalated to from support or information is pulled from them by product communications. But again, big opportunity here to move that earlier in the process and produce software that is easier to use, better documented, and so on and so forth. And then we have new disciplines that are emerging. When a new discipline emerges, it is very common for those to become departments. So an AI department is not uncommon these days, or a department of data scientists. So I think in the long run, those disciplines will be embedded within teams. Okay, so suppose we have grown and we have formed our organization into these cross-functional teams, completely independent of one another, just delivering velocity left, right, and center. Are we at cross-functional utopia? I don't think so, and we do have a legacy here of separate departments being marketed to by software vendors. So a lot of the software that is available to support development is targeted towards departments. So specific software for your testing organization, your operations organization, design, and so on and so forth. And is that a problem? There's a number of practical problems with that. First of all, the licensing models for these software suites can be prohibitively expensive for all cross-functional team members to have a seat. So, for example, usage data within the application that you're developing is extremely useful to all team members, but typically that would be housed in a system that only product has access to due to licensing constraints. Similarly, permission models tend to not support segregation of data by the same boundaries that teams might have divided up the application. So that can make for some very awkward permissioning models. And probably the most important of these is correlating the data from all of these disparate systems can be very difficult and sometimes impossible. Going back to the example of customer usage data, figuring out customer usage as it maps back to the original stories and original investments that a product owner may have made is extremely difficult. So that was sort of the genesis of Atono. So we strive to build a software suite that addresses a lot of these concerns and supports these cross-functional teams. So I have a very short demo. I really hope that the sound is going to work on this, and if it doesn't, then I'll sort of talk you through it. So, Okay, we're going to plan B. So ignore the version of me on the screen. It's going to be very strange watching myself talk and talking to myself. So right now, what I'm saying is that in order to understand where we're going with Atono, we're going to put ourselves in the shoes of a startup product team that's trying to deliver a product to market. In this particular case, the product that we have is called Virtual Vintage. It is a service that allows access to vintage synthesizers through a web browser. So there's a catalog of synthesizers. You can choose one, connect your MIDI keyboard, perhaps connect some speakers and start playing your synthesizer, hear the sound. There's also a patch interface where you can modify the sound of your synthesizer, and what I'm hearing as a fictional product owner for this product from my customers is that customers want to be able to share their patches. So we're going to see what that looks like in Atono. So here's the Atono home screen. First thing I'm going to do is create a new story. So we have a story interface here. The story is called Share Preset. And we put a lot of effort into prompting the user to create high-quality user stories to best articulate the value we're providing for customers. So the first section here is persona. So I have a suggested persona based on the other stories that are in my backlog, so I accepted that. Now I'm prompted for the action, which in this case is sharing a preset. And finally, providing the all-important rationale. In this case, it's so that I can collaborate with my fellow musicians. I then have an acceptance criteria area, and I'm going to keep the acceptance criteria very simple for the purposes of the demo. So in this case, I want to be able to share a preset via a number of channels. We have email, link, some social media, and WhatsApp. Okay, looks like I'm done. Now I'm assigning it to a team. The most suitable team for this particular story is the MIDI team. So we're going to save that story and head on over to the MIDI team's backlog, which is accessible over there on the left. So the default view for that backlog, you can see all of the different workflow steps that are available to that team and a bunch of stories that are in those steps. There's also a Kanban view, which I flash up briefly here. That you might expect. So I have a story called Share Preset, and I'm going to walk it through a couple of workflow steps. First into the design step, and then it's going to be indicated as ready for development. But as I put it into the development workflow step, I decide as a product owner, I don't actually want to release this feature to all of my customers at once. I want to release it to a segment and get some feedback. And normally, I would be doing this by means of a feature flagging product, but feature flagging is actually built directly into Atono. So I'm creating a new feature flag. It's called Share Preset, and I'm given right away a hint to my developers that, first of all, a feature flag is required for this story, but also if they're not familiar with the Atono SDK, they have a link here and they can get a code snippet. So if they're implementing it in Node.js, they just have to include these lines of code to flag the feature. So once that's done, I imagine that my story goes into development, that I no longer need that hint, and it's going to get progressed to the next phase in the workflow, which is test. Now, without any help from developers, product owners can go into the story and start rolling it out where they want it to go. So this is the feature flag interface. In this case, I'm turning it on in the dev environment. If I want to get a bit more granular with that, I can configure the feature to be on for a particular customer, or in this case, a particular location. So I am turning this on for Canadian customers only right now and turning it off for everyone else. And I save that configuration. Atono is telling me this is going to update production software. You're maybe not used to that kind of thing happening from your ticketing system, but that's what I want to do. And going back to the Atono catalog, now when I select a synthesizer, I have a brand new feature to share my preset via all the channels that I had specified in the story. So hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the conveniences that we've added for cross-functional teams to get their job done in a very simple fashion, make it easy, for example, to associate feature flags to a particular feature. It's one of a number of features along those lines, and I think that's it for me. So I have time for a few questions. And also, if you want to see more about Atono, just come visit us at the booth.
Thank you, Tobias.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tobias. I'm afraid, just being short of time, we'll get to the questions. If anyone wants to visit Tobias at the booth afterwards, you'll have an opportunity for them there. And then you're headed to the media lounge now, too.
Yep.
So that was pretty impressive to be able to talk over the demo.
It was very strange. It was a very strange experience.
You were watching yourself, too. Yeah, that's right.
Did the lips ever match up? That would be interesting.
So thanks for making do with that.
Yeah, no worries.